7:30 in the morning, the 19th of September 1944, a wet field east of the French village of Lizay. Fog sits on the ground so thick you can barely see the next tank in your own column. You are the gunner in a Sherman, and the first thing you know of the enemy is a shape coming out of the grey at 75 yards, a long gun and a wide, sloped hull. It is a Panther. It has set the price of every road since Normandy, a tank your gun cannot hurt from the front at any distance the war has ever offered. On open ground, at a mile, that Panther kills you before you can read the range. This morning it is at 75 yards, blind in the same fog you are, and the American answer is already moving to the flank on tracks built for exactly this. That answer has a name. It is the M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked vehicle of the war, and over the next 3 days, it and the Shermans beside it will break a German Panzer army in the mud of Lorraine. The Panther was winning. That is where this starts, because the reversal only means something once you see how badly it had the upper hand. The Panther carried a long 75mm gun, and the word long is the whole story. Its shot left the barrel at a little over 3,000 feet per second, a flat, fast round that crossed a mile of open field and still punched clean through the side of a Sherman. Allied tankers learned the arithmetic the hard way through the summer of 1944. A Panther could see an American tank, range it, and destroy it at distances where the American gun could not even scratch the paint. The gun reached out past a mile with power to spare. The front of the Panther was worse news than the gun. Its glacis plate was about 3 inches of steel, and the Germans laid it back at so steep an angle that a shell striking it flat met the equivalent of more than 5 inches of armor. American crews firing the standard 75mm gun on their Shermans watched their shot skip off that plate and sail away. There was no range at which it worked. The official histories and the crew accounts agree on this without argument. Against the Panther's front, the ordinary Sherman was firing blanks, and every man in the turret knew it. Through July and August, the toll of that gun was steady and grim for the crews on the receiving end. A Panther sitting in cover could destroy an American tank at a range where the American shot, if it arrived at all, bounced away like a thrown stone. Whole platoons learned to move in short rushes from one piece of cover to the next, to keep buildings and hedges and folds of ground between themselves and any direction a Panther might be watching. The men called the German tank by its shape and its reputation, and they respected it the way you respect a thing that can reach out and end you before you know it is there. An American tank commander who lived through the summer had learned one rule above all others, which was that you did not let a Panther see you first across open ground. The rule kept men alive. It also meant the enemy set the terms of every fight. So the summer became a lesson in avoidance. American doctrine told tank crews to fight the Panther from the side. Shoot for the tracks. Trade ground for a flank shot. Above all, do not meet one head-on across open country. In the close lanes and hedgerows of Normandy that summer, in the country the French call the bocage, a Panther sitting still in a sunken road could hold up an entire column, and the standard answer was to call for something heavier and wait. The British had upgunned a few of their Shermans with a 17-pounder gun that could do the job, and they called that tank the Firefly. But only a few hundred existed, and none of them were American. For the ordinary crews rolling east toward the German border that autumn, the Panther was a problem they had learned to survive rather than solve. That was the gap the Hellcat was built to close, and the way it closed it was strange enough that the army almost cancelled the vehicle before it fought. The M18 Hellcat weighed just under 19 tons, which, for a tank hunter, was almost nothing. Panther weighed about 45 tons. The Hellcat gave up nearly everything a soldier thinks of as protection to buy one quality. That quality was speed. Its armor was thin. Across the front of the hull it ran only about half an inch of steel, and the turret was open at the top, roofless, so the crew could see and hear the battlefield around them. A rifle bullet could trouble a Hellcat. A near miss from a shell could wound the men in that open turret. On paper, it looked like a mistake. What the thin armor brought was a top speed of 55 miles an hour, faster than any tracked fighting vehicle any nation put in the field during the whole war. A Continental radial engine of 350 horsepower drove it, and the running gear rode on torsion bars that soaked up rough ground at speed. The crews found they could sprint the Hellcat across a mile of open country in the time a Panther needed to grind through a fraction of it. The gun it carried was the 76mm, a real anti-tank weapon that could defeat the side and the rear of a Panther out to about 500 yards, and could crack the front only at ranges close enough to feel suicidal. The Hellcat could not stand and slug it out with a Panther, and it was never asked to. That refusal was written into American policy years before Arracourt, not improvised in the field. After watching German tank columns overrun France in 1940, the United States Army built a whole new arm to stop the next massed Panzer attack, and in December of 1941, it stood up the Tank Destroyer Command. The idea, pushed hard by General Leslie McNair, was to hold fast, lightly built, hard-hitting vehicles back as a mobile reserve, then rush them to wherever the enemy armor broke through and destroy it from ambush. 3 words named the new arm: seek, strike, and destroy. The Hellcat was that idea turned into steel. Its thin armor and its great speed were the doctrine made physical, a vehicle built to run to the threat and kill it fast rather than to stand and endure it. For 2 years the doctrine had been argued over and doubted. Arracourt was the morning it came true. The whole idea was to arrive first. A Hellcat commander could read the ground, race to a firing position the enemy did not expect, put 2 or 3 rounds into the flank of a passing tank, and reverse out of sight before the German turret finished traversing to face him. Speed replaced armor. A Hellcat that was never where the Panther's gun was pointing did not need thick plate. Used the way it was designed, hidden on the flank of an armored column and firing from ambush, it was one of the most dangerous vehicles on the battlefield. Used wrong, standing still and trading shots, it was a coffin. Everything at Arracourt came down to which of those 2 vehicles it would be. The battle itself came from a German order to attack. By the middle of September, General George Patton's Third Army had crossed the Moselle River and pushed a corps forward into Lorraine. The American spearhead was the 4th Armored Division, a hard, fast outfit whose combat command was screened by an attached tank destroyer unit, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion in its M18 Hellcats. Hitler wanted the spearhead cut off and destroyed, and he handed the job to General Hasso von Manteuffel and the newly formed 5th Panzer Army. On paper, it was a heavy force. Manteuffel had 3 fresh panzer brigades, and the one that led the main blow, the 113th, went in with 42 Panther tanks, most of them straight from the factory. Fresh from the factory was not the advantage it sounds like. The crews were new, many of them replacements thrown together in the constant strain of retreat. Their coordination showed the strain. The brigades attacked with almost no reconnaissance. They pushed forward, not knowing where the American positions were, and could not fix them until they had already lost the initiative. The German long gun was their great edge, the gun that reached out past a mile. And that gun needed to see. On the morning of the 19th of September, over the low rolling fields around Arracourt, the fog took the seeing away. Understand what that fog did, because it is the hinge the whole battle turns on. The morning fog common to that country played no favorites. It hid the German tanks from Allied aircraft, which was a genuine gift, since American fighter bombers had been hunting German armor all summer. But it also erased the Panther's reach. A gun that could kill at a mile is worth nothing when the crew cannot see 100 yards. The fog dragged every fight down to 75, 100, 150 yards. At those ranges, a Panther and a Hellcat met on almost even terms. The Hellcat's one great weakness, its thin armor, stopped mattering because at that distance the shot went through either vehicle. The German gun's advantage lived in open distance. The fog took the distance away. The ground itself favored the defender who knew how to use it. The country around Arracourt was firm and gently rolling, cut with low folds a tank could sink into so only its turret showed, and laced with a good network of side roads running across the American front. The 4th Armored Division used those roads, the way the fog and the folds were used, as a tool. When the Germans pushed at one village, the Americans could shuttle a company of Shermans or a platoon of Hellcats along the lateral roads to meet the threat and reach its flank. Often they arrived at the firing position before the slower, heavier Panzers had ground their way into the open. A Hellcat could cover that kind of ground at a sprint. A Panther could not. Its crews, new to the country and starved of reconnaissance, were often feeling for an enemy who had already moved to their side. The American commanders read the terrain like a board and kept getting the first move. A little after 7 in the morning, Captain William Dwight was driving a jeep between 2 American command posts when he saw them, a column of Panthers rolling out of the mist near the village of Moncourt. He turned the jeep around, drove back to headquarters, and reported the enemy armor. Then he went and did something about it. Dwight took a platoon of 4 Hellcats from the 704th and led them into a shallow depression in the ground west of the village of Bézange-la-Petite, a fold in the field where the low vehicles sat hidden. put yourself back in that open turret, in the depression, in the fog. You can hear the Panthers before you can see them, the deep grind of 45-ton machines feeling their way through weather they did not plan for. There are 5 men in each Hellcat, 3 of them riding in that roofless turret with the fog cold on their faces and the sound of the enemy filling it. They have loaded armor-piercing rounds and laid the 76mm gun in the direction the noise is coming from. Then the shapes come. Dwight's 4 Hellcats open fire at about 150 yards. In the short, furious action that follows, 3 of the 4 American tank destroyers are hit and lost. The men in the open turrets have no roof and thin walls. No, it. But before those 3 Hellcats go down, they and the 4th destroy 7 German tanks. 4 Hellcats for 7 Panthers, in a minute or 2 of point-blank fire in the fog. For that morning's work, Dwight was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The trade the Hellcats designers had gambled on, thin steel spent to buy the ambush, had paid in full. The Shermans were doing the same work in the same fog, and honesty about Arracourt means naming them beside the Hellcats. Around Lesy that morning, Captain Richard Lamison held a section of Shermans as a combat outpost. Panthers loomed up at hardly 75 yards. His crews destroyed 3 of them in a matter of seconds, laying their guns on before the German turrets could swing. Then Lamison did the thing the ground allowed. When those Panthers pulled back, he took 4 Shermans and raced the enemy some 3,000 yards to a commanding ridge west of Bézange-la-Petite, and got there about 3 minutes before 8 Panthers appeared. His tanks knocked out 4 of the 8 before the Germans could return fire. Then they backed over the crest of the ridge, moved a short distance south, came up again in a new spot, and finished the other 4. 8 Panthers for none. The Americans arrived first and shot from where they were not expected. The Hellcats were not finished for the day. Later that morning, the German attack swung west toward the town of Arracourt-la-Petite, trying to work around it, first to the north and then to the south. A platoon of Hellcats from the 704th was waiting. That single platoon knocked out 8 Panthers and drove the rest of an enemy tank company back in flight. Over toward Arracourt, a combined force of Shermans under Major William Hunter wheeled through the town, caught the German armor in the flank, and destroyed 9 more Panthers for the loss of 3 tanks. The pattern held everywhere on that field. The fog put the 2 sides nose to nose. The Americans moved faster, arrived first, and fired from the side, and the Panthers never got to fight the long-range battle their gun was built to win. By the evening of the 19th, the ledger for the American Combat Command that had taken the weight of the attack was 3 tank destroyers and 5 Shermans lost, with 6 men killed and 13 wounded. Against that, they counted 43 enemy tanks destroyed, most of them factory-new Panthers. That is the shape of the reversal in a single day's accounting. The tank that could not be touched from the front all summer was being destroyed at a rate of 5 and 6 to 1. The Americans won it with speed and position. Their machines reached the flank first and fired from where the Panthers were not looking. They used the fog to close the range their own guns needed. the Germans came back. Manteuffel was not a man to quit after one bad morning, and the fighting around Arracourt ran on for days, the Panzer brigades feeding in more tanks, the 4th Armored Division shifting its combat commands to meet each new thrust. The fog lifted and returned. When it lifted, the American fighter bombers came back over the battlefield and hunted the German armor from above, so the same weather that helped the Panthers hide also, when it burned off, exposed them to a second predator. They could not answer. Between the tank destroyers and the Shermans on the ground and the aircraft in the air, the 5th Panzer Army's new brigades were ground down day by day. The attacks kept coming for the better part of a week. From the 20th through the 25th of September, the German brigades tried again and again to crack the American line around Arracourt, probing at Coincourt and the villages north and south, and each time the same sequence played out. The Panzers pushed forward. The American tanks and tank destroyers used the ground and their speed to reach the flank. When the fog burned off, the aircraft finished what the guns had started. The aircraft were Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Over the Arracourt fighting, they destroyed or badly damaged dozens of German tanks caught in the open with nowhere to hide. A Panzer that survived the Hellcats in the fog could still be caught by a Thunderbolt when the weather cleared. The 5th Panzer Army was being taken apart from two directions at once, on the ground and from the air, and it had an answer to neither. The enemy's own conduct tells the story better than any American claim. The German attacks kept going in without proper reconnaissance, kept failing to locate the American positions until the shooting started, and kept losing tanks they could not replace. 2 of Manteuffel's panzer brigades were wrecked as fighting units, their strength poured out on ground where their great gun could not reach. By the time the battle wound down at the end of September, the 4th Armored Division had lost on the order of 40-odd tanks across the whole fight. The German loss in the Arracourt fighting that month ran to well over 100 Panthers alone, along with about 100 Panzer IV tanks and more than 100 assault guns and tank hunters. It was a large share of all the replacement armor sent to the entire Western Front that autumn, spent in a few weeks for almost nothing gained. Weigh that against what those machines were meant to do. The Panzer brigades Manteuffel fed into Arracourt were the fresh armor Germany was scraping together to hold its western border through the coming winter, and much of it was spent in the wet fields of Lorraine before the cold even arrived. Tank destroyed near Arracourt in September was a tank absent from every battle Germany still had to fight. Manteuffel was among the most capable armored commanders in the German army, and he had been handed new brigades and a direct order to cut off the American spearhead. He came away with 2 brigades wrecked and the spearhead intact, and the tanks that beat him were the lighter ones that refused to fight him the way his gun needed. The clearest verdict came from what the German command did next, rather than anything it said. The whole purpose of the 5th Panzer Army's effort had been to cut off and destroy Patton's armored spearhead in Lorraine. After Arracourt, that effort was given up. The repeated attacks through the last week of September had brought nothing but a growing pile of wrecked panzers, and the German command broke off the offensive and pulled its armor back onto the defensive. The mission was abandoned because the tool meant to carry it out had been spent against an enemy it could not pin down. When an army stops attacking and starts digging in, that is its own admission of who won the ground, and around Arracourt the ground stayed American. Sit with what those numbers meant to the German cause, because a tank lost in Lorraine in September was a tank not defending the border in December. The Panther was one of the finest tanks of the war by the measure of its gun and its frontal armor, and at Arracourt, that measure did not save it. Built to fight at distance, it aimed to win the first shot at ranges no American gun could match. The battle it was forced into was the opposite fight, close and blind, and in that fight, the 45-ton Predator was hunted by a 19-ton machine that spent its armor for the legs to get around behind it. The Panther also carried a burden the Americans did not have to fire a shot to exploit. The tank had been designed at around 35 tons and had grown to roughly 45 in service, and the extra weight fell hard on its final drive, the gearing that turns engine power into track. That final drive was a known weak point through 1944, prone to failure under the heavy steering loads of wheeling a heavy tank on soft ground. Lorraine in late September was soft ground. Fields were wet. The mud was deep. A factory-new Panther forced to turn and maneuver in that muck was working a fragile part at exactly the loads that broke it. Some German tanks at Arracourt stopped before an American gun ever found them, beaten by their own running gear in the mud. The weight that gave the Panther its armor also strained the machine underneath, and the boggy fields of Lorraine found the floor. There is a hard truth inside the American victory, and the crews would have told you first. The Hellcat did not beat the Panther in a fair test of tank against tank. Nobody on the American side wanted a fair test. A Hellcat that stood still in the open in front of a Panther at a mile died, and its crew knew it, which is why they never did it. The whole art of the thing was to refuse the battle the Panther was good at and to force the one it was bad at. Arracourt was the day the doctrine worked exactly as written. Scout the ground. Use the speed. Hide on the flank. Fire from ambush at close range and reverse out before the heavy gun can answer. Every part of the design that looked like a weakness on paper, the thin steel and the roofless turret, served the one part that mattered, the ability to be somewhere the Panther's gun was not pointing. Weather made the day possible, and it is worth being plain about that rather than pretending the machine did it alone. Without the fog, the 19th of September might have been a slower, costlier fight, the Panthers picking off American vehicles at long range before the flanking runs could close. But armies do not get to choose their weather, and the mark of a good weapon is that it can seize the day it is given. The Hellcat, with its speed and its low profile and its real anti-tank gun, was built to exploit exactly the close, confused fight the fog created. When the chance came, the crews of the 704th and the Shermans of the 37th Tank Battalion under a young colonel named Creighton Abrams took it and did not let go. The men who fought at Arracourt understood what they had done. They had met the tank that owned the roads of France, the one they had been taught all summer to avoid, and they had beaten it badly enough to break a Panzer army, and they had done it in machines a rifle bullet could pierce. The Panther kept its reputation as a gun and a glacis plate. What Arracourt proved was that a reputation earned at a mile could be undone at 100 yards by crews who moved faster and thought first. The tank that could not be killed from the front was destroyed by the dozen from the side, in the fog, in 3 days, in the mud of Lorraine. That is the trade the M18 Hellcat was built to make, and Arracourt is the day it came due. If you crewed one or fired a 76mm gun in anger, the comments are yours. If you have one of these machines sitting restored in a shed today, tell what you know. And tell which pairing to run next. The Tiger and the gun that finally holed it, or the Wolfpack and the escort carrier that hunted it down. Name it, and the next feared machine and the American answer that ended its run are next in the crossfire.